Thank you for checking out Philman Roll-Up and Associates Municipal Market Update, which we call the MMU. We typically release the MMU the first and third Monday of each month. June and July have thrown us a few curveballs. We've had some staff vacation, and we've also reopened two of our offices. So we've been focused on those items. But now we're back to business as usual. We've gotten some of those vacations out of the way, taken some much needed rest and time away. And here we are for our MMU at a unconventional time. It's not the first or third Monday of July, but we are getting one out there, but we will record one next week as well. And there's been a lot of activity that's taken place, and we'll get into some of those details now. My name is Adam Bauer. I serve as CEO and president of Philman Roll-Up and Associates. Philman Roll-Up and Associates is a municipal advisor to government. So on our first slide here, it's one that we've shown you for many months now. It's the MMD, the Municipal Market Data Yield Curve, and we show all the maturities starting with year 1 going to year 30. And the bar charts represent the range of interest rates for each one of those maturities going back to 2005. The red line represents that MMD as of 7/12/2021. What I had talked with you a lot about over the last several months is on the short end, that MMD was at the absolute low, scraping the bottom. But when you got out to years 7 through 30, we were lifting off that a bit. It doesn't look like that's the case now. It looks like we've drifted back down towards the absolute lows. You actually have some maturities there, years 5 through maybe 11, that aren't quite as low as they are on the long end or the front end. But for the most part, we're seeing very, very low interest rates right now. If you recall, in March, I was very concerned about inflation, and we saw rates drifting up. I'll show you some charts to talk about that in a moment. But as of this moment, investors seem less concerned about inflation and more concerned about finding bonds that are tax exempt, and if you live within the state, that double tax exempt, both state and federal. So we show the MMD yield curve 5 years ago, 1 year ago, and 7/12/2021. That red line represents 5 years ago. You can see we are quite a bit higher, but then we have two different green lines. So the light green is current, and the dark green is about a year ago. And hopefully what you're noticing there is kind of what I described in that last slide, where the front end is a little bit lower and the long end is a little bit lower, but some of those middle maturities, here it looks like years 5 through 10 are kind of the exact same they were a year ago. So just more examples of kind of where we are for historical standards, only going back 5 years, but also kind of what that yield curve looks like and how it's changed over the last 5 years. So what's driving a lot of this? We continue to see inflows into the municipal bond funds, other than the kind of sell everything rally that we had in March of 2020. For the most part, we've seen money flowing into municipal bond funds. So that this is demand for bonds. And we've also not seen a dramatic uptick in the supply of bonds. And that's what we're going to show on the next slide. So this next slide, what this shows is the supply of bonds in the primary market available to buy. And hopefully what you're noticing is 6/28 low volume, the week of 7/5 low volume. Now, finally, the week of 7/12, we are seeing an uptick in volume, which is needed because you have all that money flowing in. So maybe some of that pressure lower on rates will abate as we have more supply available. Another thing I think is really important to show you is those dotted lines represent averages for different years. So the red line seems like forever ago, 2019, quite a bit lower in volume, below that 8 billion. And then you look at it 2020, and that's a little bit higher than 2021, but not much. You can see that 2021 dotted line, we're just a little bit lower than that 2020. When we started the year, there were a lot of forecasts that 2021 would have a substantially more volume than 2020. So now that we're in July and we're still at a lower level of volume than 2020, it'll be interesting to see how the year plays out. If rates do stay as low as they've been, I think there's a real possibility that we could have more supply than we had in 2020. So here we are comparing the 10-year US Treasury to the 10-year MMD. And what we spoke about in March was the real signs of inflation. I think I said something to the effect of inflation is coming. And we're reading about it. I think there were studies showing that the uh, market news commentators were talking about inflation substantially more than they had in the last few years. And when we saw that, you saw the 10-year Treasury drift up, and then hopefully noticing there in the very beginning of March, then the MMD 10-year also drifted up in a very dramatic fashion to kind of catch up, it looks like. And then you see a typical financial graph, ups and downs, but relatively steady until early July. In early July, what we saw was the 10-year Treasury start to drift lower. And it's ticked up just a slight bit since then, but you can see that 10-year Treasury is lower. I think these MMUs will try to really focus on that going forward, is how is the 10-year Treasury behaving? I think that's a sign of how investor sentiment is towards inflation. On this next chart, we're showing the economic calendar of data that's expected to be released. As I think I've said almost every MMU since we started doing this in April of 2020, these numbers are very important, and if they come in different than expected, will certainly have an impact on the market. But because of the COVID-19 disruption, it's very hard to look at data month over month or year over year. But at some point, we'll get through that and we can have a more meaningful conversation about the economic calendar. Following our last slide here, I want to highlight our team that's available. These are the Philman Rollap and Associates registered municipal advisors. I encourage you to reach out to any one of them, and they can provide additional information. I'd also just like to take a moment to congratulate Melinda Case, otherwise known as Mindy. She recently passed the Series 50, so she's a new name on the list, and we're very happy to have her on the team. So thank you for taking the time to watch the MMU. I look forward to talking with you again next week.